Welcome back to the Futurist New Deal podcast. This is the first podcast that we are recording in 2020, and I'm very pleased to be joined by Kevin Kane, CEO of Ambit Inc, a cybersec expert, and we've already had some wonderful conversations, and I'm pleased to continue them here on the Futurist New Deal. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the comments. I don't know that I'm an expert, but I'm learning. I'm certainly passionate about that field. I'm passionate about a lot of fields. So my background, I lived in South Korea for 10 years. That's why my accent is different, because Korean for a while was for a daily language for me. And then I returned to the US kind of in culture shock again after growing up here. I spent 7 years in the US Army. I started out poor. I built, this is my third tech company that I'm working on. When I like something, I really dive in. I really like it. I write about identity formation and the formation of sentience. And the reason is, in my graduate degree, I studied international relations theory. So that's like why we go to war, and modeling and forecasting. But then I thought, I really want to get into the details of human psychology and development. So how do we get out of this situation? And what is like a more fun, like a bigger, deeper common denominator we can look at? And so I write about a lot of different things. That's one of the blessings and curse of being on a spectrum and having ADHD is that I can't stop. So,
well, I think most technofuturists would view that as more a feature than a bug.
Okay. So
this is something we share in common. Having lived in Korea, I have to admit I wasn't there nearly so long as you. I've spent only one time there, and I also didn't live in the city of Seoul. I lived in a city. A few stops down on the KTX train, Daejeon. Yeah. But I liked going up there to Itaewon and other parts of Seoul, and I miss a lot of that. So we had a lot of fun out there.
I think you fit in Daejeon. Daejeon is famous. There's this stereotype that the Korean men there are very charming and pleasant. So Korean women all the time they fantasize marrying. They say to themselves, "Want to marry a man from Daejeon because he will be warm." Very fascinating.
Very good, very good. Well, I think that the writing that you have done, and it is quite impressive. You sell yourself short, but this subject of international relations and foreign affairs, and understanding the implications of emerging technology, and all of these sort of game theory questions are very relevant to our audience and to the transhumanist undertaking. And so I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. Well, tell us a little bit more about what drew you to study international relations, and tell us a little bit more about your work.
Okay. Well, in international relations, it's a little bit different from political science. So in political science, people kind of put themselves in camps, and then they identify themselves that way, and they make enemies and foes, and he's like communist, and he's like this. I like IR theory because you're removed from these camps, and it's not so personal. It's not a tribe. It's more like, why does the world have 60 million casualty wars? And what is the common denominator to them? IR theory is not history books. So history, the causality is usually like this leader came to power, or after World War I, the Germans felt cheated on land. IR theories, they're not interested in these things at all. It's more like a game theory of 1 and 0s in Prisoner Dilemma. So there was a power vacuum, so there was no clearly defined leader in Europe, so there must be one. Because where there's an opportunity to be one, someone will pursue it. So you're looking at some assumptions that can be wrong about the nature of people, the nature of a collective people, the nature of living in a security scarce world, and then you look at that carefully. So there are 3 theories in IR theory, so it gets more complicated. Think of IR theory like a derivative of philosophy, because it does have a lot of underpinnings and it cites a lot of them. So there are 3. There is realism, and then realism, there are some derivatives as well. So neo-realism, and then there is liberalism. So like Joseph Nye, I believe he worked for either President Bush or Obama. I had to look, I forgot that, but he's famous for soft power. And then you have another one called constructivism, which is a little bit closer to historians. So they try to look at the leaders as causality, like the personality type of Putin or the personality type of Trump. And they try to say Americans' foreign policy is like X because of Trump. A structural realist would say, no, 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 no. America's foreign policy is like this because the US is relatively declining, and it was very predictable that they elected a president like that. So it's about how you want to look at the world. And why this matters is that you're trying to do forward planning for your survival. So if you have a model that explains when and where you might fight on like a 10 or 15-year window, then you can start preparing your military or start preparing to try to make peace now. Or you can go to you can bring the world leaders together and say, hey, look, if we look at all the predictors in big world wars, we're at the cusp and we all want to avoid it. But if you don't do your research, you can't have that conversation with world leaders. It's really important because it helps you to frame the problem. And when you frame the problem, you can be very effective at persuading people. So there's a lot of models out there that suggest so the most scary one about structural realism is that there are three types of regimes you can have. The one is a unipolar, so US superpower, it's just one. Right, so in the 90s, after the fall of Soviet Union, US was the unipolar world. Then the second one is a bipolar, that's the Cold War. And then the third is multipolar. So I'll give an example of why these three matter. So during the Cold War, the least amount of casualties, the least conflict was bipolar Cold War. After the Cold War, there were a lot more smaller wars because it was a vacuum. So all the smaller countries realized the two big ones were not sucking up all of the room. And so therefore they fought each other much more. Case in point, like Rwanda or East Timor. Then you have many more genocides. And then you have, now there's a relative decline of US. So you have now a lot of edge cases of more conflict. I'm very skeptical of the study that say humans are becoming less violent. They show this chart. It's a very selective data set. Human trafficking is also going up. Maybe humans are just expressing more violence elsewhere. So I'm very also cautious of looking for data that comfort us. I personally like to look at all the darkness so that we can try to resolve the problem. I don't want to be told things are great. That doesn't help me to live 10 years later if it's not great in fact, or there's blowback somewhere we're not looking at. I want to obsess on all the problems so that we're very vigilant and focused on them. For the average person, they might find this deeply disturbing and a big turnoff because a lot of people don't want to face all the dangers. They want to hear that humans are becoming better. There's a belief that if I say things will be better, they will be better. I don't think that that is the case. It's not going to stop a human trafficker from doing human trafficking. So IR theory is a little bit stoic because you're not personally invested in building your model. It's like if you took the mind of a quantitative trader and you put it over the social world, and you're not allowed, generally speaking, to try to include your personal opinion. Because your job is to model the world objectively and then plan around that. It's not about what you want. It's about what the model says. And if the model says we're heading towards a 50 million person war, I want to know that now so I can either prepare or I can try to stop it, and these kind of things. And that's what IR theory, in my personal opinion, is a little bit about.
I'd like to discuss these two fields that you have a lot of insights into. This particular area of computer science that your company is in, and also this particular area of study and writing that you've done in international relations. It is quite likely when I was at RADFest, Ray Kurzweil presented on the state of predictive algorithms coming out of Google Labs, and these algorithms are getting so good that in a few short years we may be able to, for example, predict the weather almost in many years in advance. Human affairs are maybe a little more capricious, but even so, we may be able to see that million person war coming at some remove, or possibly at least have a list of potential events that we could be trying to prevent. Do you have any thoughts on the utility of such algorithms, and what would you like to? How would you like to see these things used? How do you see them possibly develop?
I like to tell you the biggest danger I think it is right now in the short term, in the next 5 years. I think the biggest danger is those in power using it to stay in power. So the tools that became evident about the U.S. having in terms of the intelligence capabilities of the U.S. on the internet, let's say, for example, many countries are pursuing them, and some of them don't have the checks and balances of the U.S. and they will just be used to stay in power. Imagine if you could read through the internet any attempts for dissent and stop it, any attempt to assemble and stop it. Because what I know is that all of these other developing countries are pursuing it. They're pursuing this for nefarious reasons in many cases. Some of them want to stop terror or things, and many of them just want to shore up power. Because what if you didn't have any kind of check and balance for these things in the worst case scenario, and you did it? I have news for you. They're doing it. And they're doing it in a lot of places. So that means that freedom will never see the light of day. That's the big short-term risk, and it's very real, and it's happening. And I think anyone can see the news, especially in the last 3 months, and see more and more cases of it being, and not just in the OECD countries as well. If you throw billions of dollars at it, which at a nation-state level is not a lot of money at the government level, you can achieve these tools. So they're rolling out chat apps where they can read all the messages. They're using semantic analysis to interpret threats. Also, not just threats to gun shooting stuff, threats to their political power. And then they disappear in the middle of the night. So I think a lot of people don't understand that freedom is not, it sounds cheesy, not as free as people think. So when you and I live in South Korea, every living president in South Korea, except sitting, is in prison. It's a democracy in the OECD. I was in South Korea 2 presidents ago when the week after he won and arrested 400 nonprofit NGOs and oppositions, took all their computers. That's how power is used in most of the world. And when you have these tools for predictive algorithms, that's how they will be used. So I think that that is a big risk. I think that in an ideal world, there would be in a new framework beyond the UN, a new framework where we discuss this. Maybe it's incorporated into the WTO. If you're using predictive analytics to shore up political power, you're not allowed to participate in international trade. But I think that that takes a backbone. Yeah.
Interesting. We were talking a few minutes ago about this. Well, I wanted to ask you what your impressions of. We have 7 more days before Brexit occurs, and we were talking a little bit about nation state problems generally, and I think this Brexit event certainly represents something along the lines of something that was at least propelled by this kind of social engineering and advanced algorithm set of problems. But it's also something that reflects a changing face of the 21st century. And I'm inclined to think that we might be moving out of the nation state model. And it's an open question whether that moves to city states or moves to something less tested historically. What is your impression of Brexit, and also what states, what forms of governance might emerge in the course of the 21st century?
I think that let's pick an objective. So let's say the objective is 25 years later to be better off. I think nobody can really predict that, right? You can take take my case, right? So my unique life, which didn't always have its pleasantries, resulted in me being me. If my life always went well, maybe I end up not doing well. And so from that point of view, I don't want to put a prediction on what I think about Brexit or the EU, because my objective would be in doing that is where they're better off in 25 years. And I don't think anyone can know that. So I don't want to get into that trench to try to resolve that. I think that city-states are an exception in the Westphalia world. And the reason is they tend to be like Singapore. They tend to be, Singapore is the wealth management capital of the world right now. And so Singapore is safe because all the world's wealth is there. So where there is money, people will throw military to defend it. Nobody will let Singapore sink so long as their wealth is there, right? Even if it's your pension and you make 100,000 a year or 60,000 a year, you also, as that blue collar worker, you don't want, if your money is in a pension fund investing, you don't want Singapore to sink either because it's your future. I think from an IR theorist would say, unless you have a military or you have an alliance with someone with a military, you're not safe. There is also this view that in the last one, there's another view. So at the end of World War II, it also signified the end of empires. So international trade was secured by an alliance with an empire. So piracy is still a thing now. If you actually sign up to Google Newsfeed, piracy, you'll see it every day. A lot of people don't know that. On oil tankers, they're attacked and stuff like that. So historically, to engage in international trade, you had to make an alliance with an empire. And then they had warships, going over the sea lane. After the fall of World War II, the U.S. said, we're going to put an end to this empire business, and we'll manage it all. And if you're on the side of the free world, we will protect you. If not, we'll think about it. So that was the grand bargain. Now, that is kind of falling out of fashion because you have other rising navies. The question is, are we going to return to a form of previous empire-like picking our global alliances for trade? Or are we going to stay in the liberal world order where everyone's is protected? But unfortunately, the United States is paying that financial burden. As Peter Zeihan would put it, a former analyst at Stratfor, though, the US is the biggest defender of international trade and guaranteeing safe passage, which is very important because without that, there'd be a lot of more pirates and a lot of sunken ships and stolen stuff. They try every day. It's just not on CNN every day, so people don't realize that the world is extremely dangerous and violent, actually, especially on the high seas. And how do we go forward with that? So I don't think we're going to move past nation states because we still live in a very violent world. Now, I made a joke with a friend that if we had crypto nations, then piracy will be big business because they're going to come and take your stuff. It's very profitable for people to do that. Now, I want to explain that. I don't believe in that. I've never been arrested. I never have an assault record. I'm not a violent person. But when I say that, I think about how other people might behave and how we look at some statistics of crimes. We look at how a lot of regimes behave, and we can imagine it's very reasonable. Saddam, invading Kuwait, right? And these kind of things in Crimea and Cross. And if we're entering a resource-scarce regime, so humans behave less rationally when they're scared, and then you want to say we're going to get rid of the nation states, well, I might be really worried. What if an occupying force moves into my city and just says we're taking all your stuff? So I think we have to think about how do you mitigate the security problem.
Do you think that there is do you think that transnational entities could begin to fill some of these roles? Or
I would kind of like if the world focused on space. I think that would be great. I think that I've watched every episode of Star Trek there ever was, and I just think that we need a big shiny ball to look at. I have an expression.
It is the driver.
In the Army. So in the Army. I was in basic training with a gentleman who joined because his partly told me a story. He was in a convenience store when his sister's guts were blown out by a shotgun. I was in with every kind of ethnic group, every kind of demographic experience. And one of the things you learn about the Army in particular is that it's a very individualistic place that has a lot of synergy. And as a whole, we like that part the most. I think those of us who live there, they always say everyone's green. It has its issues, but I think there are outlier cases, 3 and 4 and 5 people doing something heinous out of 600,000 people or n number of people, hundreds of thousands is miraculous. And it's just for us a very endearing experience of working with people. And why it works is that we're mission focused. No one has time to look left and right when you have somewhere to go. So like when I work for JAG, so I work paralegal. One of the things you learn is that crimes go down when soldiers are in the field. So when people have somewhere to be, somewhere to go, and they're focused on it, they tend to not look at left and right. So they tend not to worry about the Joneses next door when they're focused on where they're going. And I think humanity needs a place to go. I don't think it should be Instagram comparing each other. I don't think there's anything that'll come out of that positive. I don't think it'll be like whether my neighbor is rich and I'm not. I think it should be whether or not humanity is going to go to space or not. But we also know as we develop that not every human is like that. In fact, I came across this interesting paper about genes. And some humans have a certain gene in this one study where they don't like to live in a village culture, and it's depressing for them, and they modeled that. And some humans, they're depressed when they're not in the village. And this kind of becoming aware of these things is really important on how we figure out how we accommodate humanity. So you and I might be pioneers, but there's plenty of people that don't want to go anywhere, and they're not bad people. So, but I do think going to space would be fantastic. Just get everyone focused on space. This is my ideal world, and then less fighting, right? Because we have this new awesome place to go. And how is it we're going here? You even have time to talk to each other about being angry. It's just we're going to see these, awesome things. And that's for me, but it's maybe too simple to work.
I think it's an incredible organizing principle. As an aside, did you watch Star Trek Picard pilot? It was on last weekend.
I saw the first one, and it was great. So I'm not going to give any spoilers, but I wish I saw more on the first one. I was like, and the ending of it was confusing because it was this really unusual shaped ship, and I was like, wait a second, this is a bit weird. Yeah.
Yeah,
Is
I
she a
like
bad guy or a good person? Yeah.
yeah. That was an interesting character introduction. Yeah. So let's go back to the United States um, uh, for a moment. In an earlier conversation that you and I had, we talked a little bit about in passing about the military industrial complex. I guess as a role of having a big role in research and development, and also the importance, particularly as it relates to advanced algorithms and digital technology to continue that kind of impetus. On the other hand, we were talking just a few moments ago about this problem where the United States has a lot of overhead for sort of, in a word, this role that they've taken on after in around the end of the Second World War in sort of being a world police. What do you think What do you think the balance is there to do to for the best outcomes for U.S. citizens?
Well, that's a heavy one, right? This is like kind of no matter what I say, I'm gonna make somebody unhappy. So I'll rather look at it from an academic perspective and offer some scenarios. I think that whatever the U.S. decides to do, let's say they pull back, then something needs to be considered for to vacuum. Something needs to be considered for the sea lanes. So humans, we can't say we can't say we have to be an open country to everyone and be accepting of immigrants, but then say we don't care about power vacuum in the Middle East. That's a very big contradiction. So you don't care about their human lives, but just a general statement, you're going to say you care. You either do or you don't. And I think that's essential to get straight consistently. If we say we care about people, then we have to care about the vacuum. And that means that if we pull out, people will say, wait a second, I can get my country more richer now because the US, let me go take that. People will die a lot. Now, there are people that say maybe Americans are not responsible for that. That's fair, you can say that. What all I'll ask is that we have a framework for mitigating that. I think this is essential. And we can get into how policy works in the UN and what parts have teeth and don't. The only part that has teeth is the Security Council. So people always say, like, if the UN has an army, it can do it. What do you mean, what army? It doesn't have an army. And it can't do anything. The only army it has is the one that the Security Council members lend it, which is China, Russia, US, for example, and France. So if they don't lend their army, Russia's not going to lend its army with the US against Russia. So we do have, above the level of a state, we have what they call anarchy. There's no government, and there's no police, and they can't have it. Because why would you give it against your self-interest when you definitely have competing interests with these other great powers? I mean, resource abundance is essential here. So the way to get interests aligned is to move to a new paradigm. But we have to work very hard on the technology part. I think it is essential for a nation state to realize that if we want to move past the nation state model, we want to live in a global community, we have to solve the resource abundant problem first. Can't put the cart before the horse. Because if you put the cart before the horse and we pull completely back and this kind of whatever radical scenario we can imagine, could be a lot of fighting. And it's a little bit dangerous. And also I think that the best framework for the future for humanity is to not trust ourselves. And it goes back to, I always tell people, tell me the one thing that tomorrow is the day you're going to finally fix. You all have that. If we can't get that right, then how can we trust ourselves to be fully self-aware as a leader also making decisions? I think we should be scared to death of ourselves. And then together, because we don't trust ourselves, we can work together on a global community in that context. So I don't trust the Saudi or I don't trust the Russian leader to be fully rational. He doesn't trust me. We have some humility and we kind of laugh about the fact that we might make a stupid decision. And then we rely on each other to help each other not make stupid decisions. That is an advancement in sophistication for our leaders that would need to happen, though. I think that it goes back to earlier in our conversation. I don't know if it was before the podcast before. I think that it's very essential if we're going to talk about transhumanism and superintelligence that we first have to reduce our self-confidence a lot in our own intelligence, because we're not as capable as we think. You find me our smartest person, and they will be full of blind sides. They will tell you 2 weeks out. They will tell you now why they do something, and 2 weeks later give you a different answer. Because we ourselves don't always know why we do what we do. That means we're very dangerous in power. And so if you want to have a post-country world, or you want to have this, I think that first step is to not trust each other, but then to have a global conversation about that. So there's some humility and community around that we're laughing about, how imperfect we are. And then we build trust on an honest framework. But we have to get this metaphysical thing right first, because otherwise we're just blunt objects banging into each other. That's how I see it.
Yes, I'm glad you brought up that particular transhumanist question, because there are people who believe that any move toward superintelligence in terms of advanced algorithms, or human enhancement, it will create possibly more chaos, a mind that is less ordered in the wake of that great intelligence, or problems of that kind. How do you think that we should? How do you think that we should? For example, do you think there's a case to be made that we should try to slow the singularity or slow these kinds of effects? How do we mitigate these concerns?
First, I don't know that we can. Secondly, I think what we could do is try to race ahead of the ball to start making a conversation about how are we going to address that none of us are really sentient the way we think. And I'll give an example. We can give 100 different explanations of why we do something, and all of them can be different. It's like when you, in the case of court, seeing someone commit a crime, different people can all give different accounts of the same event. So then we're going to give these people superhuman power who are all perceiving things differently. I think that we may not be able to stop the singularity, but maybe we should start having conversations about how we make incremental improvements around consciousness in the brain, not just whether or not I can read a book in 5 minutes. Because absorbing knowledge is useless if we don't have higher order thinking and synthesis. And then massive match of introspection. So there is a lesser known branch of psychology and identity formation. And it simply gets down to, it says that Freudian psychology is not so important as a predictive factor. And it's more about the human mind is telling a story to itself. So I think of myself, let's say I think of myself as a veteran, or let's say I think of myself as a cybersecurity person, or let's say I think of myself as someone on the spectrum. How I can tell myself every day a different story. Maybe if I tell myself I'm a former soldier, I have my shoulders out more. Maybe if I, because when I was in the military, you put in uniform and suddenly your shoulders get bigger. It just, you don't know how they just get bigger. Or maybe if I tell myself, I highlight my spectrum as my first identity, then maybe I start stuttering more. And the human brain is very funny like that. It does this. And that is because I think what happens is I tell myself who I am, and I try to present that to you. Right? Because why I always thought when I studied sociology, when I would go to the bus stop, there would be someone wearing like saggy pants. There would be someone wearing their hat like this. There'd be someone wearing clubbing clothes. There'd be someone wearing clothes with like a vest and a tie. And I thought, why do we do this? Why do we do it at all? And people want to present who they want other people to see them as. So even the most woke person or whatever we want to be, even the most intelligent, genius, lab-working person, we're all pursuing an identity we want other people to see us as. And that branch of psychology, what they suggested is, what if we tell ourselves a different story? So the idea is that consciousness is a constant storytelling. I also suspect that humans cannot evolve intellectually. We cannot evolve sentience without each other, because it's a constant story to the self that we present to you. And the more we become aware of that storytelling, then maybe the more we can move the brain beyond that, right? Without becoming insane, of course. I think that if we lose the story, humans can become insane. That's my suspicion. I'm not a student of that. And I think that if we're going to talk about superintelligence, we got to talk about the storytelling part of the brain, this formation of consciousness. You know who really got into that was Marvin Minsky. So he wrote 2 books on this. He wrote Society of Mind and Emotion Machine, and maybe another. I have a funny story about that. So I was at the MIT Media Lab. I wanted to pursue a PhD at MIT, so I met some people there. And coincidentally, I sat next to a couch, and someone was fiddling with a phone. And I wanted to help with their issue. I just overheard them. And then we started up a conversation, and it went to like 0 to 100 in metaphysics super fast. And that was Marvin Minsky's wife, and Henry Lieberman at CSAIL, and a bunch of people. And we had a conversation around resource scarcity and individualism and where does it fit in. They wrote a book called Why Can't We All Just Get Along? And you should check it out, Christopher Fry and Henry Lieberman. And in the opening credits of the book, I have my one little name bullet out of like 20 other people, because I contributed at least as a feedback on their book and a lot of debating. We had debates for weeks on this one Google Doc going back and forth about things. It was a very fun exercise. But Yeah, I don't know. I got off on a tangent.
That's all right. It sounds like your read on this question of this ultimate sort of cyborgization question. Do you believe that minds will be able to be reverse engineered and recreated in silico, or do you think that this is we're too much we're too much defined by these physical things?
Well, what if we recreate them? Let's say you set Marvin Minsky's approach. The mind is a series of unaware parts. That doesn't give you consciousness, though. So maybe you can recreate all the parts that generate memory, that generate synthesis of some information, but consciousness is a very different thing. It's like this, I'm aware that my brain is moving parts and that I feel separate from that. Like I feel in the air. My mind is in the air feeling. And I'm not a kind of expert on that. If anything we recreate doesn't create that, then it's not alive. I mean, it's not sentient. And I'm no kind of expert on that. But whatever we do has to get to that, right? I mean, unless we can have non-sentient robots, I guess that's fine. But I would love to I don't have the background education knowledge, and I haven't done any research in that area. I think it's a really fascinating one. I think people like you and others can get to a place where we can resolve that. But we need to also understand how consciousness is formed, so then we can recreate it. Is it formed by constant storytelling, or is it kind of like some kind of in-memory RAM state holding on to some short-term information, and then it stores like some other memories far away that we can rarely recall, and that kind of thing. And one of the things I do notice is that I think the brain stores history and information hierarchically, and as it becomes less important, we tend to forget it. But what if we could evolve the brain where it's all flat and we can see and remember everything all at once? And that would be incredible. But I think that our personalities would radically change. Like right now, I'm telling you a story of me, and you're telling me a story of you. Maybe we're not like that anymore. Maybe we really are getting to a type 1 or 2 civilization. We're biologically evolving completely. Maybe humans become more like the Borg because our priorities and the way we communicate is different. And I don't know that we want to take that away. And part of being aware in life and the beauty of it is storytelling, right? Storytelling kind of gives us this enjoyment of life. You get to be this person. You enjoy that identity. I get to enjoy being me. And I think the sad part is when people don't get to enjoy being themselves, and then they're missing the most beautiful part about life. I think if we could use this technology to help those people to find themselves, to not in some kind of elusive, self-help book, but in a sincere way, like getting their storytelling on track for themselves and defining their identity clearly and in a healthy way. And that would be fun. I don't know, to answer your question, maybe small steps would be great. Because maybe we're racing for how to build the first space rocket, but we haven't figured out how to make the wheel yet.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes. I have one other question about that reverse engineering question. But I wanted to say about what you said a moment ago. I've long wished for that sort of ability to have that indexing, that sort of flatter understanding of and an ability to access your mind. And it seems like in many ways that's being mediated by interfaces in ways that might not necessarily fundamentally change experience. And I mean, already, for example, if I want to recall a conversation that I had, one of the first things that I might do is go to Facebook and go to that sort of history tab and do a keyword search and find the references to those conversations that occurred, at least that occurred on Facebook. But that's kind of a fun motif in a Black Mirror, is that sort of augmented reality recording of everything that's occurred and being able to sort of call that back. I'd certainly like to see those kinds of things.
You mentioned,
but I was when I was at Princeton University, the Princeton Envision conference, and I was presenting there, and part of that was also judging some competitions for new speculative technological undertakings. And a gentleman who's actually coming on the podcast very soon, Logan Thrasher Collins, his presentation was about how to reverse engineer down to the individual neuron these fly brains, and he had his proposal would require the computing power of an entire continent, practically, all of China, all the chips in China, to do it. But it was a really fascinating proposal, and I think that just doing that, reverse engineering any simplistic mind to that extent, could lead to some kind of acceleration effect. I think it's maybe in the Charlie Strauss book Accelerando, where they've reverse engineered a relatively simple creature, this lobster, but in doing so, because of the compression of time and the many cycles of the compressed evolution, effectively it almost instantly set off a kind of AI explosion. And I'd be curious to see if such a thing could come to pass. Yes, I am very hopeful about these things, but all of these things are very much a double-edged sword. There are just as many security issues as there are reasons to be optimistic in these matters. I'd like to shift gears because I wanted to get your read on something that's been nibbling at the back of my mind in recent weeks. We did a panel discussion on another podcast a few weeks ago about a micronation project in Bolivia, a smart city project, and we're doing another about Akon City. A hip hop mogul and philanthropist Akon has built a smart city in Senegal, which has an interesting feature. It has a blockchain currency. This city will have its own currency, sort of being semi-autonomous. So having a few African futurist leaders discussing this on February 8th, I believe.
You should go ahead. My CTO on there to discuss that. So we're filing some patents in this space in our company that will assist areas in edge computing. And we spent about a year on fully decentralized technology that doesn't require, it also had to do with communication, no supernodes, and working on net traversal and some more esoteric things in that space. And we developed a lot of IP and also in some other areas in networking. So actually, we are up for working on a smart city project. So that's very interesting. We would love to, if you ever come across, to talk about our innovations in the area, although I'm not really inclined to talk about that right now. So our websites don't really get into the detail of what we're really doing at our company and those kind of things. But I think smart cities are amazing. I think they're technically really cool. I think there are a lot of our technological breakthroughs that are required to bring them to their full potential. And I think our company is positioned to play a leading role in that in the world, and that's our ambition. And that is not hubris for us because we have some of the innovations and insights required to do that. My co-founder, he's from born in California, grew up in Nashville, Tennessee, and he was the president of their Linux user group, and he also was a member to their Nashville 2600. And he has a long resume of accolades. He's a really bright, brilliant guy. But go ahead, sir, on that. I mean, we would love. You just got me itching. Want to change gears in smart cities.
I'm going to have to insist that we continue that conversation when you're prepared to do so, because I think that an interest in these kind of communities, it's central to technofuturism, and so I hope. I was joking, of course, saying that we would insist, but I would really enjoy that.
Yeah.
Well, let's go even to a wilder kind of governance model, and because I want to know if you think it solves some of the problems that you've described, these international relations and game theory concerns. So I'm inclined to believe that there is a chance, a non-zero chance that over the course of this century, human beings might cease to exist. I don't hope for that. I would hope that we will all do everything in our power to prevent that, but it still seems a possibility. Now, there is no institution on Earth that has the requisite quadrillion dollars, or certainly the political will or anything approaching the public interest in doing something like this. But imagine that we were able to convince everyone and build the infrastructure to have a city the size of New Jersey, as densely packed as Hong Kong, that houses all of humanity. Do you think that that solves any of these problems with clearly it's a different paradigm from the nation state, but do you think it solves these conflict concerns and other concerns like municipalities are a little bit better at dealing with the management of resources or the oversight of other institutions than nation states, which are more geographically dispersed? What is your feeling about such a thing? And do you think that it could reduce if it were implemented at some point later in the 21st century? We don't know how resources could change in an accelerationist framework. Do you think that such a thing could reduce the possibility of the utter annihilation of the human race?
Maybe, but the question is, do people want to live like that? You and I might, but there are many people that don't. And I think humans are in their infantile stage, myself included. So really low expectation for myself of understanding how different we are. We have, even if we translate our languages, we don't have a clear understanding of a lot of things. We might understand love. Love doesn't make a company run. Love doesn't get rockets built just alone. So in Korean language, they might say, gradually they say, "Ajuketa." And that means like, I want to die. And when you hear it in English, and your 8-year-old says, "Ajuketa," I want to die, you're going to call a counselor. But for them, it means like, I can't have that thing I want, dang it.
Yeah.
And so you're going to put this in a city. I think we need some prepping for each other. And sure, it could be trivial, but to the average person, this can destroy their mental health. I mean, among English speakers in the U.S., the divorce rate is extremely high. Then you mix, it's even harder. So what I'm saying is that I agree, maybe it has a great solution, but we have to also understand that we have a ways to go with still. I look at like humans still becoming awake, and we're not there yet, and we have quite a ways to go. I'm a pragmatic idealist, I call it. So when someone says, I want to make world peace, I'm like, okay, what's the plan? And if you said to me, we want to create a super city, I'm like, okay, so practically, how do we do this? And on what timeline? Like a Chinese company building a city in 3 years, or in Korea, they do the same thing. So I'm like, all right, well, what are the blueprints? And then how are we going to organize the money? But before we get to that, maybe 300 years later, or 400 years, or maybe it's on the moon, or maybe it's on Mars, or in the clouds of Venus. There's something funny about going somewhere new that allows people to overcome the past. In the case of the United States, there was this great liberation from the traditions of European past that were holding people back. I mean, that's one of the things that I like about it, is that, sure, the U.S. has plenty of tragedy in history from slavery and Indians. At the same time, there was this benefit of abandoning the traditions of the past to become something new, to become more free and more open and accepting of all kinds of things. So going to a new place might change people's psychology, rather than putting the place on top of the one where they already live, full of history and memory. It is essential for, I think, humans, when they move forward, to cut the umbilical cord sometimes off of the past. We can observe when I studied graduate school in South Korea with almost all Koreans, the professor used to always say, we have a long memory. And they're always fighting over words between Japan and Korea. To the observer, you're like, I respect it. It's a very tragic thing. But there is the stars, there is the moon, there is AI, there are other things that will make that a moot point at some point down the line. So what my point is that when we're in the same place where we fight, sometimes it's hard to move on. And moving to new places gives us this liberation from it. So maybe that city is on a planet. And then it works for humans because we have left the past behind. And leaving is symbolic subconsciously to us.
It's admittedly more in the realm of a thought experiment, but I think it does address some of these ideas that we had already discussed. I wonder if we could talk about the prospect a peace between North and South Korea or reunification. Again, maybe also more as much thought experiment as anything else. But your background with and also insights into the U.S. Role in this sort of thing. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on these two countries rejoining one day.
Very delicately. I'll give some disclaimers. So I have a thesis that was trying to make an edit in interpretation of Korean democratization, and it was picked up in a citation in foreign policy. So in the hard science, that would be like getting it in Nature for social science. Just a citation though, with this tiny thing, and that's it. But I have a passion for Korean history, I suppose. Just give me 1 second.
Yes, I had a student, a language student who was about 80 years old, and it was interesting because he grew up outside Pyongyang, but most of his adult life had been living in South Korea. So he had a unique experience of having been a citizen of a united Korea and also a citizen of South Korea, and as well of the United States, where I met him.
Yeah, I was some noise. I don't want to disrupt, but basically, it's a bit personal for me. So I friended some North Koreans who left in South Korea, and I attended one of their weddings. So when they leave, they often leave their family behind, because it's very hard to take. You can't take all of them. So when you leave, you make a decision that you make an impossible decision that people will die as a result of you leaving. Someone can say that's a selfish decision, but when you're under the kind of tyranny they are, being taken out in the middle of the night, when they're forced to eat the remains of each other, which they are in their prison camps. So you can read Aquariums of Pyongyang. So some people have made that there are some exaggerations, and they're fine. But what is not an exaggeration is that a lot of North Koreans suffer from pellagra, so they develop this deficiency in apart from only eating corn, but the corn is grown over there in the prison camps, the remains of the dead. When you're reduced to that, you have to leave. And I met him and these kind of people. And they're a very sad life, very sad. I think what most disappoints me is when people attack them. I think you should be empathetic. Certainly, there are those among them who say exaggerating things. You would too, if that's all you had to live and survive. And that's how bad it is. I mean, it's really clear there's no unification until the North Korean ideology is you give up. No one wants to live under that, including North Koreans. And there is no way forward for it. It's not about political system. It's just unforgiving power at the center, and they don't want to share it. And they're afraid that if they unify, they will face war crimes. It doesn't matter about the whataboutisms. The reality is they probably will. So who does what in other countries is a moot point. For them, that is the reality. And also, there is this problem with democracies change. So even if the US has a policy towards North Korea for 4 years, the next president can change it. North Koreans have gotten used to that. So they don't trust the US because they change their policies. Where they think 50-year view, they know that we change ours every 4. They, in some ways, know us better than we know them, because they have a lot of continuity. The downside of that, of course, is their tyrannical government. It's very violent, and if they're forced to return when they can't escape there, they kill them or torture them or do experiments on them. We know this. So you ask about unification. Well, my view is probably pretty standard. Not until there is no more North Korean regime. And of course, North Korea belongs to them to do together. It's a very tragic situation. But if you talk to any South Koreans, I live there. The only world, I mean, they have a very organic democracy now, right? So when they don't like their president, they're not afraid of anything. And they will go there and say, you're going to resign. And they're not afraid of their government, zero. They're not even afraid of their police. You know, it's a joke that when they get pulled over, the Korean person say, what are you doing? And they're very aggressive. They're very confident, and they have their own organic sense of liberty and rights that they exercise there. Also in South Korea, just to mention this, when I said that getting into the details of the details are very important, South Koreans, many of my friends, will change political parties every election. So they're more voting for, like, they want to know that they're going to live longer, and they want to know that their country is secure, and they want to know their economy is growing. And I think my personal observation is those 3 things tend to be a top priority. And whatever party offers that, those are the 3 things they will vote on. And then the other stuff comes second, third, and fourth. I've noticed that for a lot of more developed countries, they get to this nice phase where we can spend time on other things. But from a Korean view, every year is the last year of the economy. Samsung is like 20 or 30% of the GDP. So they see scarcity, they have a scarcity mind every day. So that means that their political decisions are, you could say, ultra rational. Well, how do I live? Because I think next year is the end, and I'm back to $100 year income. So their decision making is really honed. And when they look at North Korea, they look at it very pragmatically like that. They're not rosy optimists. They want to know the specific way to survive.
I was always curious about this. Well, I mean, there's whatever the role of the North Koreans might be. I don't think there's too many people who look at the Korean conflict and the ensuing schism and what we're describing here as everyone recognizes that this was effectively a proxy war between China and the United States in many respects. And I wonder if you think there's anything that the United States or China could do to facilitate a peace on this peninsula.
Well, I think that there is truth to that. But if you want to get into, it's not really related to this podcast, but it's okay. We can get into the details of the details.
Yeah.
So there's several books. One's written by Bruce Cummings, and they're two huge volumes. And he's he's actually the single best historian in the world on Korean history, because he reads Korean. He went to the archives and documented and wrote it all, like line by line. And there are a lot of books like that that are very, very, very detailed from their archives translated to English and interpreted. Lee Sing-man was the first president of South Korea. And we know Kim Il-sung was the first of North Korea. Both of them were going to, Lee Sing-man was well documented in the hallways of the Department of State, banging on doors, metaphorically speaking, looking for help for his cause. Kim Il-sung was doing the same thing. So he lived during Japanese occupation in China. He actually lived in a Christian home. It's very unusual. People don't know that. And he had, at the end, neutral feelings about them, but not bad. But some argue that he had to say that because of the deal he did with the devil, right, to get their arms and forces. So part of their history was also the conflict between those two. If they could have settled, right? You're in charge. They had their own pursuits, and so what I want to say is that to say it was a proxy war is a bit of a generalization. It's extremely complicated. But yes, there's truth to that. There was also a conflict within the peninsula without the outside influence that was also not resolved, because both of them wanted to rule Korea and they couldn't agree and didn't want to accept their victories, which is very tragic. But I just wanted to get that point of fact.
Well, are there other matters in the pre-interview we discussed moving beyond zero-sum paradigms and your interest in a word, game theory, very broadly. Is there any other talking points from that pre-interview that you'd like to call back on the subject?
Absolutely. Preventing war requires people not to defect in a cooperative game. And defection at a macro level is very hard. So and also with changing leaders is very hard. So let's say two countries go into an agreement, they're going to build a nuclear fusion reactor. And then there are, let's say, 30 states involved in that process from the US, and from other country, 5 provinces and cities and mayors. All it takes is one of them to break the spirit of the agreement, not even at the will of the leader, for cooperation and trust to be broke. So until we resolve that, there will always be mistrust. Because, like I said, it's really hard to even trust ourselves sometimes. We have a hard time changing our own habits. But it is essential. Maybe it is in technology. Maybe it is, in neural links or some kind of technology that gives us greater self-awareness to be consistent with what we say, so that we can more organize ourselves and organize a group so that somebody doesn't defect. For example, I can make an example. Even if North and South Korea, there is an agreement to never shoot each other. What happens if a brigade commander takes it upon himself to fire? So when you have a lot of parties, organizing mass cooperation is very difficult. But resource scarcity, I mean, resource abundance, however, really makes this much more likely, right? Because why would you fight when you have everything you absolutely need? That's why I like the Star Trek story so much, right? Because they can go to the computer and say, make me Earl T. So, and I think that we should spend our resources on that. But I think that we have to buy time. And we do need an international conversation with world leaders. We're buying time to get to a resource abundant world. Hold your patience, please. Because on a resource scarce regime, I don't think there is an easy way forward to peace. You and I can agree to it, but what about the 100 other people not under our authority completely, or under our authority but might not follow our guidance, or they don't like us? And then they break the trust. They say, I can trust you and me, but I can't trust 100 people working for you, or just one of them to break the spirit of the agreement you and I make between our two companies or countries. So I don't like simple answers because it's complicated. Yeah.
Yeah. But I do think that moving forward, many of these situations will tend to get better, even dramatically better. Even the kinds of trust building that you're talking about. And some minutes ago, you talked about your company and blockchain solutions. This all of this bodes well, I think. But maybe I'm just inclined to play the optimist.
I'm with you. I think that there should be just one internet in the world. I think that countries should not separate it. I think that that's regressive. I think that we shouldn't have political speech censorship. And in the U.S., it's one conversation. For the rest of the world, it's basic things or get taken out in the middle of the night. And that is a real reality for them. If you look at transparency.org in terms of freedom to express yourself and a lot of different metrics like that you can get into from all the different think tanks in Washington, D.C. that offer them, and in Europe as well, about 5.5 to 5.5 billion people live in a really bad situation. And they're not allowed to publicly challenge their governments. There was just a gentleman who returned to Northeast Asia, and he went to prison for things he said about their president that were negative while in Canada. So a lot of people don't know that in many countries, they police their people overseas on what they say and do. And when they return home, they go to jail. And that is how most people live in Northeast Asia, including in the developed countries. So their social media is monitored while they're studying in the US. And if they say our president is a moron, when they go back, they can go to jail. And it is essential then to protect their privacy on the internet so that they can express themselves and grow and change and would not be accountable for that. I think it's really important to have somewhat of a decentralized future in the internet because we're kind of tormenting each ourselves, because even myself, I read the things I write and I go back years later and I'm like, God, why would I think like that? The beauty is that I can see myself changing. So without Facebook, I wouldn't be able to do that. And you can see yourself progressing. And all that tells me is that I have to be careful not to trust myself now, because 5 years later, I might be even smarter or even more wise. So I'm going to go about my day treading carefully on how confident I am about right and wrong, because I can look back and say, just a year ago, I said dumb stuff. But the thing is, I think people shouldn't be accountable for that. I think that we shouldn't be accountable for growing. And we should be able to erase that like it was when I was a kid. So if I was at a bar and I got very angry and I said, I'm going to blah, 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 it was lost into the air forever, right? And then months later, I can, as I change or I get into a car accident and almost die, and I'm like, I got to be a better person, right? I get that chance. But with the internet, it's very hard to grow because people keep chopping. You grow, but you're getting eaten alive with it. And in the developing world, it's even worse, right? They go to jail for it. And I think it's essential to protect privacy. So we are rolling out a post-quantum encryption VPN. We've tested it in several markets. We tested it in Bangladesh. It works really, really nice and super fast. And we're working on one that will be $1, around $1. Don't quote me on the exact price, around $1 per month. No advertisements and profitable for us. So that is somebody does that. It'll be $1 and profitable for us economically without advertisements and no selling data. We found a way to cut our operational costs to do it for that. Now, this is a theoretical thing for us. We have checked out the economics, but the point is, as a company, we're working towards that direction. And I see this essential because you can forget development of democracy unless people are able to organize themselves on the internet to express ideas, to be wrong, and to grow. Now, in terms of the recorded history on the internet, I can't solve that problem right now. Maybe a more decentralized one would be better because I can just delete my my history on my device. And then there will be people saying, well, what if what if they can't be then held accountable for nefarious things that they say and do, right? Like threats and stuff. Well, when I was in the 90s, people were not accountable either. If I was at a in a parking lot and someone threatened to beat the crap out of someone and no one heard me except the other person, I'm not accountable for it either. So why does it have to change exactly? Why do we need to police each other that much more? I think that humans need a large margin for error in growth, and without accountability completely in that process of growing. This trend towards trying to micro-police everyone, I think, is extremely unhealthy, because humans need a huge margin for error to grow and to figure out themselves what they're doing wrong. The other thing is, it's important, is that in terms of culture, maybe I sound like becoming an old fart, but I think it's really, I see in this, when it comes to internet technology and the decentralized future and a private future, is I have a lot of things to say. I'll say, this is my bold speech. You can forget the development of new democracies without protecting free speech on the internet in the developing world and protecting the right to privacy. Forget it. You will never have another one. And that is a crisis abound. And our company is a part of the process to defend that. I personally am a belief in democracy. I'm a big fan of a perpetual peace written by Immanuel Kant. And he makes the case that democracy is a key to world peace. And so it is essential for people to express themselves, also to grow. Human self-actualization is not always symmetrical for everyone. So there is a growing process for all of us. But we go down this process of self-actualization from debate and learning we're wrong, and tragedy from being wrong. But if everyone's afraid to express themselves, then we will never have the tragedy and never see where we're wrong. So we need to have a wide margin of being wrong error and correcting and moving forward and being able to forget the past. That's my view. I don't know. I have a very different vision for the future, a different lens on the problems we face. I care about human mental health. I want humanity to self-actualize. I want us to go to Mars and to Neptune and to see things and make a colony on Europa, you know? So,
do you think that a country could implement a social credit system that is judiciously done and benefits the citizenry to a great degree? Or do you think that it's always going to be a troubling sort of thing?
well, humans are slowly improving. So what's the rush? I mean, maybe we have to lower expectation. Maybe it's not my generation. Maybe it's not our children's. Maybe it's 10 generations later, where they organically, without technical aids, become more mindful people through an organic process of learning with each other and at great price. So I know that if I have to live in a social credit system, I might alter my behavior, but am I altering my heart? So I think that unless we're altering our heart, it's just buying time before blowback.
In a lot of situations.
I mean, it's like if you're rich, right? And like Mike Tyson said in an interview, they're talking about the people around him. He said, I don't really know if they like me. They like my money. And so you're talking about social credit system. So some kind of reward I can get, right? Something with power is going to reward me by lying to it about what I believe. Yeah. Do you want a society where people are lying to each other? Look at it like one of the phenomenon I always tell people in South Korea, before 1988, people had to always say nice things about Korea, or they could go to a political prison. So when you visit Korea, you'll find that they're very complimenting the country. A part of that also comes from the history. They had no free will, no free choice. If they didn't, they were shoved off to a prison camp. When you so you want to use technology to impose on people to say nice things. There'll be a lot of psychological damage to people from that.
I do agree that there's definitely big drawbacks to even I think the best of this kind of program, which doesn't exist. The only forms are the kinds that you mentioned, the most famous kind, which is deeply flawed. I would say that of what you said a moment ago, that a person restricting behavior doesn't necessarily improve the quality of someone's thoughts. The behavior is really all that we care about. I'm a lucid dreamer, and so last night I took some galantamine, and I had dreams that were nightmarish. But I woke up today and I did not do anything nightmarish.
I will propose a hypothesis that you can alter someone's short-term behavior, but what if there is blowback when the game is up? So, if you work for a boss who is a total jerk, he can incentivize to alter your behavior to tell them whatever they want. When it's your turn to be boss, maybe you're wise and forgive them, or maybe you totally punish them. And when you make people do things they don't want to, some people, when it's their turn, will have a very big blowback. I think that everything has to be based on choice for it to be sustainable. For people to be good, they have to choose it. For people to say nice things to each other, to be mindful, it has to be a choice. It cannot be because of fear of consequence. Now, in the short time, you can do that. It works. Revolutions are also born historically out of a blow up of that, right? So before the U.S. revolted against the UK, right, the British Empire, they told them everything they wanted to hear, and for a while they bought it, but it was a lie. And when they got tired of it, there was a blowback. I think that behavior is a lot like electricity. When you block its behavior in one area, it just goes somewhere else. So if you block access to Google, and because people crave information, they will develop a black market to get to it. You cannot stop people. People want what they want, and there's no way to stop it. So you could look at like North Korea. So they put a lot of restrictions on people. And some people who like it think it's success. There eventually will be blowback. Maybe it takes 10 years, maybe it takes 20, maybe it takes 200. There is like almost like an entropy or an inertia, and nothing can stop it. That's my assumption. So whatever we design has to either fit the will of people and their nature, or we have to help people to get their mind in a place where the things that they want are more incentively aligned with everyone else. So like self-actualization can help that, or getting a better control of our habits, like, or being more consistent in, if you ask me, why did I argue with that person at my office? And I'll give you an answer, because they stole my pen. And then 2 weeks later, I might tell you, actually, it's because the way they look at me upsets me. So I gave you two different answers, but both times I was telling you the truth. The thing is, I didn't know that I had that other reason in me until I thought about it. And what I want to get at too about that is that we cannot have a social credit system. We cannot have fixing people's behaviors until we can fix this single problem right here. And like that's why my blog is called Almost Sentient, because I'm really obsessed with like how like for me, I feel handicapped by the fact that I don't have all control of my mind, because I don't want to be inconsistent. I want to know at that time when you ask me the question, all the possible answers that are somewhere deep inside, because then I can sort them. For me, I want to optimize myself to be a better human, to be kinder, to be more consistent, to never lose my temper. That is my life goal. But that is extremely hard. I'm not into the self-help and the guru books. I think this is a scientific problem. I think that this requires a lot of rigorous thought and categorizing things. I think that while we came to understand the universe and it became less mysterious, human consciousness and behavior over the next 100 years will become less mysterious, and it'll be extremely empowering, because then we will have people. No one wants to engage in self-destructive behavior. Let me give an example. I always go with the view, minus the malicious, where it's somewhat of a choice because they have some neurological and other issues. For the most part, when you ask someone, even you ask a prisoner, did you want, if you could have been the president of the U.S., would you have chose to do that? They would have said yes. Or you could have been a doctor, they would say yes. People behave the way they do because they don't know how to do different. And even if you tell them how to do different, it's very difficult to change the habit. I always find it hilarious when people say, he knows what you have to do. And I'll say, yeah, what about you? You said you've been wanting to go to the gym for 10 years, but you haven't. So how can you have a different standard for them than yourself? Changing our habits is extremely difficult. My favorite book actually ever is written. It's a 19th century philosophy book. It is a self-help. It's called by Samuel Smiles, but it's not self-help. It's not like, ooh, you're going to be happy today. It's a very detailed book. And it gets into the importance of altering habits in order to altering ourselves. Yeah. I gave you an earful, I'm sorry. But I want to be carried, not to be trapped into a frame of questioning that I think is a bit lateral to some of the problems I think it's getting at. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
And I've really enjoyed this this conversation and getting to these many different subjects. And I hope that we get a chance to do this again, Kevin. This has been a lot of fun.
I think
my device is just about to power down in a minute or two. So if you have any concluding thoughts on any of this, please feel free.
I just apologize for being so boring and long-winded. So that's all. And I'm not sure I'm very relevant.
No, I don't think that the audience will see it that way. I certainly haven't. And I'm not at my best tonight. So I should apologize to everyone as well.
I will leave with this. I don't know. I don't have the answers. I'm not proud of the things that I have. My answers. I'm just trying to learn. And my positions are high openness. So people have better ideas. I want to read and grow. I don't. My identity is not connected to what I say. My identity is trying to figure out and learn, and that's it. So if I offended anyone, I'm just learning like you. So inform me. That's all.
All right. Yes. I'll plug your website. Is that okay?
Yes, you can do that.
All right. Almost sentient.me, Kevin Kane, and Ambit Inc. Incredible talking with you, Kevin. Have a good evening, sir.
www.ambitvpn.com is the launch of our post-quantum encryption VPN.
If you've enjoyed this show and would like to see more, please like and subscribe. And also check out benzion2020.com for updates on the campaign, and go to transhumanist-party.org and sign up, become a part of the Transhumanist Party.